little bit of both, and the good thing, phase 2, it's both. So yeah, that would be a great one. And with an anterior step down, as you're watching that stability, you can see if they have the neuromotor control to be on one leg, right? So even like if we're talking top tier SFMA, standing on one leg, can they do that 10 seconds, eyes open, eyes closed? There's body weight competency 2. I was talking through the necessity for that diagnostics at one point, because we had an ACL patient actually that was doing anterior step downs, and he just was struggling. So he could do he was a pretty strong kid, but he was doing like 3 or 4. And so my student was like, what is going on? Like, why can't he do anterior step downs when he's passing Y balance, he's doing all this other stuff, body weight's fine, loaded double leg squats, no problem. And yet that single leg capacity is decent. So I'm like, all right, so if you go back to that diagnostic process, what are you going to look at? So we talked through like single leg strength, so you can test through some of that stuff. So we would look at Y balance while he's passing that. Ankle dorsiflexion, can he actually dorsiflex? He had like a big time like turnout whenever he was trying to do anterior step downs. So some people have a little bit of a duck toe out, and yet some people, it's like, if you correct that, what happens? Every time we corrected his foot forward, now we have this severe valgus going on. So what is that? Is that strength? Like, do I have to go back to strength for him or what? What we found out, because his rear foot elevated stuff was fine, his lateral squats were fine, he had a significant limitation in his midfoot pronation capacity. So if I redirected him, it was a mobility limitation in the ankle and the foot itself. So it looks like a valgus, and everybody would be like, oh, that kid's super weak. He was not weak. He just needed mobility in that ankle in order to move. So I think that's what's really important too with the body weight competency stuff, is like really sussing out, is this a mobility problem making them move like that? Do they have a mobility problem? I don't have internal rotation at end range, so that's my flexion looks pretty like weird or really compensatory. Or I can't flex. I have to come into this like almost like scaption or abduction in order to do this because I don't have end range rotations. You know what I mean? So this phase is really important to make sure mobility is cleared, because it starts looking like strength deficits down the road. So that's good. Cool. All right. So then, yeah, so we got that phase 3, and we're looking at, man, now we're really in that resistance training. We're finally loading these motions a little heavier. Maybe we're diving a little bit into power training, right? So really trying to get that aspect. This is the first time you're adding velocity components, because if you think about that force velocity graph that's in the module there, you guys could see like, hey, we want to start introducing velocity because now they can control active range. So let's put a little pace to it. Can they control it when there's a little bit of speed added? This is when you're going to start varying your planes of motion even more, especially in loading. Acceleration, deceleration drills, or like pre-running, like we've talked through before. And we'll talk through a lot more of these in detail next module. If anybody's like, what the heck is pre-running stuff? We'll talk about that more. Here's where you're getting into a little bit of plyometrics. Here's where you're getting into some cognitive challenges or dual tasking kind of elements. And then here's where your cues are changing. Maybe you're not cueing for these ideal like movement options or like different movement options. Now you should be cueing like, do that faster, or can you be more explosive, or can you do that with greater amounts of height? So honestly, you're talking more through like intensity, right? So how am I training this person to do these movements? So you don't have to cue necessarily for safety or to limit pain or whatever, because they are out of pain. Like phase 3, there shouldn't be any pain. If we're training, anytime you're adding velocity, there should not be that element of range motion or pain going on. Any questions that stand out from this phase? We'll come back around to Andrew, since I haven't chatted with you in a hot second. Any particular things stand out in that one?
I guess this is where like objective strength testing, like would this be kind of more like if you're doing like the isometric, isokinetic, or like if you don't have access, like you're doing like an AMRAM just to see like what their like max is, and then if that changes over time. Like, because a lot of places I have been to in the clinic I'm at, like strength testing to really see if there's progress is more like MMT, and I'm like, eh. And so I want to implement that stuff to a degree, but sometimes I get a little pushback because the patient's like, oh, this is hard, or some of the PTs are like, why would you do that? Like they're fine, they're like a 5 out of 5. Because I really do like, I feel like that's the thing I struggle with, is trying to get some sort of like objective measure for strength, or like a reference, so I can show that there is like actual progress beyond just maybe like the intensity of the weight or like volumes, things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so definitely. So I started doing Tindeck testing even in that phase 2 because of the fact that you are trying to figure out like competency, right? So yeah, like internal, external rotation with the shoulder, prone, external rotation or prone T's with the shoulder. If we're doing like ACL, knee extension, knee flexion, and especially comparing LSI, right? So limb symmetry index, and then also just like quad to hamstring ratios, that kind of thing. So I would say, yeah, phase 3, like 2, 3, you're really diving into that. Phase 1, not really. I'm doing MMTs maybe in phase 1 because of the fact that I want to see, is that tissue aggravated when I pull on it. But as far as like phase 2, 3, they should be very low pain, if no pain. So I'm safer to go to a max isometric, right? And then I do want to start comparing limb symmetry to make sure that I'm like making progress, like you're saying. The big thing that I tell people is, if you're testing something, what is the point? What is the purpose? So I've seen plenty of therapists, or even like students who are like, let's test Tindeck. Let's test Tindeck again. Let's test it, but it's like, okay, what information is it giving you? So if I want to know, I want to see if body weight competency is doing well, I'm going to test body weight competency. If I want to show to the insurance companies or to my patient or to myself, I want to see that strength is moving onwards and I'm getting closer to the point where I would trust them with velocity, let's say for phase 3, I would want to see that limb symmetry index is getting much, much better, or that quad to hamstring ratio is getting better, before I'm like, ooh, let's do snap downs, let's do some plyometrics, where I'm not sure you can handle it, we can try it. So a lot of PT is trial and error, let's be honest. And yet if we can objectively say like, yeah, like this patient is at least 60% quad to hamstring ratio, as far as like, let's say an ACL patient or something like that, then yeah, I would like to know that information in order to say like, I'm pretty happy with where they're strength wise. Let's start implementing some velocity based things or power based things, right? So I would say anytime that you feel like what you said, like I can show this progression, let's go for it. MMTs will max out quite quickly, as we've all seen, because it's like, yeah, this feels great. Or maybe their leg is stronger than my arm. For me, somebody's pulling in a hamstring. Yeah, that's a 5 out of 5. And yet, are you able to carry your body weight, which the body weight of that person might be like 170 pounds. Okay, well, I'm not pulling with 170 pounds of force with my own bicep. So it is to the point where logically we have to say, what is the load being asked of this joint or muscle or whatever? Granted, no muscles work in isolation. So it's not like only a hamstring to neck is going to tell me they're ready for 170 pounds of pressure, because everybody's working together, right? Calf, quads, hammy, like everybody's helping. And yet, can I objectively say, yeah, this patient's gotten a lot stronger. They're a lot safer where they're at. Let's do some testing. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Yeah. All right. Anybody else, anything from that phase 3? Feel pretty good about that? Very good. All right. And then phase 4, get into like the more sport specific stuff, or if it's a work specific person or hobby specific, really diving into what they have as their goals. So can we make any of the treatments look a little bit more like what they do? You need that more like chaotic environment, so less predictive, right? Like we're not sure what's going to be thrown at us, and yet we still have an objective for the movement pattern. So yeah, personal contacts, we're reintroducing kind of that movement outside of the clinic. So we're doing some return to run stuff, maybe prescribing run ratios if we need to, walk run ratios, or running in general. Maybe we're doing return to throw with our throwing athletes, making sure that we're implementing that little by little, make sure they understand how to do that safely. Maybe we're increasing from the phase 3 side of things. Maybe now we're increasing our volume or our duration of things or our intensity of things. And then I would say, honestly, one of the number one things that we have to get to in this phase that I don't know that we do enough of, / maybe I'm talking to myself, is fatigue-based training. So if I'm playing sports where I'm going to be under duress, or I'm running, or I'm getting fatigued to a state, or I'm expected to, let's say when I worked in Colorado, I was working with a ton of ultra marathon runners. So at that point, I had to have them run 30 miles before they would come in that morning, so that we could do some training under duress. They were not getting any kind of feedback if we were just kind of doing our little dynamic warm up and then trying some things. They would go out, and it was the mileage that was tough to control, that neuromotor stuff, to control that body weight competency or any kind of load once they got out there. So it got to the point where we had to prescribe pre-workouts for them to come and then train. Maybe your soccer players that are running 9 miles a game, do I have them come in a little bit early? I want you to run. Maybe we're doing interval works because that's more like soccer. And I'm going to have them do interval training on their own for about maybe 30 minutes before we even get started. Now I want to see what their leg can do under load. Now I want to see what those plyometrics look like. Or, hey, we're doing some headers and you have to land from there. So that's like a huge one in this phase that we need to make sure that we're getting to at that point. Any other things within that phase that you guys are like, hey, I need to make sure I do this, or I have a question about this, or any particular things for this phase?
I guess for me, my big thing is like in terms of experience with like field sports athletes up to like an extent. Like I think I told you before, like 1 through 3 are the ones I feel relatively good about. But as you
Mm-hmm.
said, like progressing them back towards that environment that they're supposed to like play in or perform in. I feel like sometimes like do you like because you mentioned the fatigue based training, like do you tend to focus on certain at like key aspects that they need to maintain during those performance or like athletics events, or is it more the type of like movement or activity that you focus on more? Is it like more quality based or like task based is my big question.